The recording played. Just 4 seconds of it. And Stevie Wonder, in the middle of performing live on the Tonight Show stage, stopped singing. His hands lifted from the piano keys. He sat completely still. Jimmy Fallon couldn't speak. 300 people in that studio held their breath. Because what came through those speakers was a voice that had been silent for 11 years. A woman's voice. Clear and true. Singing a harmony that only one person on earth would have recognized. It was a Tuesday night in late October. Studio 6B at 30 Rockefeller Plaza was exactly what it always was. Bright, warm, controlled. The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon had been on the air long enough that nothing surprised anyone anymore. Hosts knew their marks. Guests knew their timing. Producers knew their cues. Everything moved on rails, and the rails never broke. That was the deal. That was the job. The audience of 300 had filed in that evening the way Tonight Show audiences always do. A little giddy, a little wide-eyed. Running through what they'd tell people the next morning. Stevie Wonder was the guest. The room had an extra charge. Everything was going perfectly. The band had been swaying gently for 20 minutes. Questlove's drumsticks were tapping softly against the rim of the snare between segments, keeping the room warm. The audience had settled in the way audiences do, shoulders down, phones away. That collective exhale that happens when people realize they are exactly where they want to be. Stevie was at the piano. He had been laughing. He told a story about a flight delay in Detroit that had Jimmy doubled over at the desk, palm flat on the surface, helpless. He was exactly who the audience needed him to be. Comfortable. Enormous. Himself. The roots swayed softly in the corner of the stage, unhurried. The way a river moves when nothing is pressing it. Jimmy leaned forward and asked about the early years. He asked if Stevie would play something from before the stadiums. Something from the very beginning, when the rooms were still small enough to see every face. Stevie nodded. He smiled the way he always smiles. He settled his hands on the keys. He began to play. Then from somewhere in the wings of the stage, a small speaker clicked on. Not loud, not performative. Just a sound, a woman's voice, clear and true. Singing the same melody Stevie was playing, in perfect harmony from somewhere that no longer existed. Stevie Wonder's hands did not lift immediately. It took about 3 seconds. But Jimmy saw it. The way the chin tilted upward. The slight stillness that moved through the shoulders. The fingers that had been pressing the keys with full confidence slowing to a stop, one by one, as though the music itself was draining out of them. He sat with both hands resting on the silent keys. His head was turned slightly to the left. Toward the sound. Jimmy said, "Stevie. You all right?" Stevie did not answer. The entire studio froze. The audience didn't know what was happening. Had he forgotten the arrangement? Was this part of the performance? He was 73 years old. Was he okay? Those were the thoughts moving through 300 people in real time, none of them right. All of them holding the same breath. Then, barely above a whisper, Stevie Wonder said one word. "Clara," his voice barely above a whisper, but caught perfectly by his microphone. 300 people held their breath. Nobody moved toward him. Nobody moved at all. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened in 1963. Stevie Wonder wasn't always Stevie Wonder, legend. In the spring of 1963 he was 13 years old. He had one record out, one hit, and a voice that could stop a room. But no real understanding yet of what that voice was going to cost him or carry him through. Motown had him on the road before most kids his age were allowed to stay up past 10. He played small venues, church halls, civic auditoriums in mid-sized cities where the marquees still had letters you had to place by hand. Places where the rooms were small enough that he could feel every single person in the audience. The way you feel temperature change when you walk through a door. He was not yet famous the way he would become famous. He was talented in the way that makes the people around you nervous, because they can see something in you that you cannot fully see yourself. He played a show in Chicago that April. A community center on the south side, maybe 200 seats. It was a Thursday night and it had rained all day. The kind of cold spring rain that makes the streets shine under the streetlights and keeps half the people who said they'd come from actually coming. He was 13 years old. He was on the road without his mother for the first time in his life. He stood in the back of the hall before the show and listened to the room, to the sound of people settling into seats. The specific frequency of 200 people making the kind of conversation that means they are still a crowd and not yet an audience. He thought about whether any of this was actually going to last. He was 13. That is the kind of question a 13-year-old on the road alone asks himself in the back of a community center, while the lights are still on. Clara Reeves was 31 years old that night. She taught music and choir at an elementary school 6 blocks from that community center. She had come alone, taking the bus in the rain. Because none of her friends understood why she loved his music the way she did. Not just liked it, loved it. The way you love something that tells you something true about yourself. She had a notebook with her. She always had a notebook. She sat in the 4th row, directly in the center, and she watched him perform for 45 minutes and then she went backstage. Because she had something to say and she had decided before she arrived that she was going to say it. She told him that his voice carried something she had never heard in a singer that young. Not polish. Not technique. She said, honesty. She told him that most performers try to move you, and his voice simply told the truth and let you decide how to feel. She was a music teacher. She had spent 15 years listening to voices the way doctors listen to lungs. She chose those words carefully. He was 13 years old and he had never heard anyone describe what he did in a way that reached all the way down to the actual thing. He asked her whether she thought it would last. She said, only if you keep telling the truth. She had a portable tape recorder with her. A woolen sack. The kind public schools used for language labs in those years. She had recorded the show from the 4th row. She played a few seconds of it back for him in that backstage hallway, just to show him what honesty sounded like from the outside. And then, because she was a choir teacher and could not hear music without joining it, she sang 4 bars of harmony alongside the recording, right there in the corridor. Her voice and his recorded voice. Together. In a hallway that smelled like floor wax and damp coats. He stood completely still and listened. He never forgot it. They wrote 2 letters back and forth over the following months. Then, life moved the way life moves when it has somewhere to be. He went back on the road, then into the studio, then into the decades. She went back to her classroom. Neither of them failed the other. They simply went where their lives were taking them. She taught music at that same school for 31 more years. She retired in 1994. She kept the tape in a shoebox in her bedroom closet, next to a photograph from that night and both of his letters, held together with a rubber band that had long since gone brittle. Clara passed away 11 months before this taping. Stage 4. The doctors had given her 8 months. She had used every one of them. In those final months she got her things in order. And getting her things in order included writing a careful letter to Stevie Wonder's management company, with a copy of the tape enclosed in a padded envelope. She wrote, I told the 13-year-old boy that his voice told the truth. I want him to know he kept his promise. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Behind the scenes, Stevie Wonder had made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. When the letter and the tape reached his team, he had listened to the recording alone, in a studio, with the lights off. And then he had called The Tonight Show himself. He asked for one thing: Clara's daughter Renee seated in the studio audience, 3rd row, left of center. Told only that she was there as a guest. He had not briefed Jimmy. He had not briefed the segment producers. He had told one person, the audio technician responsible for the stage monitors. He gave her the tape. He told her exactly when to play it. Now, on the Tonight Show stage, Stevie Wonder was sitting at a silent piano. And 300 people were watching something they did not yet have words for. Renee in the third row had both hands pressed over her mouth. She had recognized the voice the instant the recording played. 4 seconds was all it took. She had not been told. Nobody had warned her. She was shaking. But this is the moment no one in the studio, and no one watching at home, ever saw coming. Stevie Wonder turned away from the piano. He did not stand. He simply turned, very slowly. And he said, "Is she here? Clara's daughter. Is she in this room tonight?" Renee stood up before she had decided to stand. She was crying before she was fully on her feet. He heard it, he heard the shift. The way the room changed when one person in it stood up and broke. He turned his face toward her, and he said, "Your mother told me something in a hallway in Chicago in 1963. She said honesty was the whole job." He paused, his voice barely above a whisper, but the microphone caught every syllable. "I have been trying to keep that promise for 60 years. Renee walked toward the stage. Nobody stopped her. Nobody redirected her. The floor director looked at the segment producer. The segment producer looked at Jimmy. Jimmy Fallon was already out from behind the desk. He walked to the edge of the stage, and he sat down on it, legs hanging over the side, and he said, "Folks, I think we need to let this happen." Stevie reached into the breast pocket of his jacket and produced a small cassette tape in a clear plastic case. The case had a crack across one corner. The label on the tape was handwritten in blue ink, faded but legible, "Chicago, April 1963. He had made his own copy that same month, from the original Woollensack recording. For 60 years, in every city, through every decade, through every stadium, and every Grammy stage and every ceremony, it had traveled in his jacket pocket. He held it out toward where he heard her. Renee reached up from the floor of the stage and took it with both hands. They were both shaking. He kept his hand around hers for a long moment, and when he finally let go, he said, "She was right about everything." Renee said, she knew. Her voice broke on the second word. Questlove stood up from the drum kit. Not to play, just to stand. The director did not cut to commercial. The camera operator closest to the stage did not move. Stevie turned back to the piano and began to play the same melody again, softly, slowly. And this time he sang it alone, in full voice, and the studio was completely silent. 300 strangers not moving, not applauding, not checking their phones, just listening. Jimmy Fallon was openly sobbing. Not quietly, not privately, in front of every camera, without trying to stop. Questlove was crying. The camera operators were crying. And then the audience, 300 people who had come to watch a talk show on a Tuesday night in October, were holding hands with people they had never met and would never see again. Row by row, without anyone asking them to. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. After the show, Renee stayed on the stage for 40 minutes. She and Stevie sat side by side at the piano bench while the crew broke down the set around them. Nobody asked them to move. 6 months later, the original Woollensack tape and his cassette copy were donated together to the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, where they are kept now in the same archival box, labeled simply, Chicago, 1963. Every year on the anniversary of that Thursday night in April, Renee drives to the museum. She asks to see the box. She doesn't open it. She sits with it for a while. The way you sit with something that belongs to someone you loved. Stevie Wonder, before every concert, reaches into his jacket pocket, just to check that it's there. Jimmy Fallon keeps a photograph from that night on the shelf at home. Not on the show set, at home, where he sees it every morning before anything else. Because a 13-year-old boy in a hallway in Chicago heard the truth about himself, and he never put it down. Because some recordings don't fade. Because some voices keep their harmony long after the room has gone quiet. And because some promises take 60 years to be received.